What we want to talk about now is the different ways on how you can use the essential oils. And of course, the original ways to do aromatherapy that has been done for thousands of years. The problem comes, can you ingest oils? When you go to aromatherapy school, they will tell you never ever consume, internalize an essential oil because it could be life-threatening. Well, so watch my suicide right now in front of the camera. Oh, just about 3 or 4 drops. Look, I completely understand the line of thinking because there are essential oils you should never internalize. However, what that line of thinking should also understand is when you just stay with aromatherapy alone, you're missing out on so much of the world that the essential oils can give us. I hear people that are really very, very aggressively defending the statement you should never eat or consume an essential oil because it's dangerous to your life. Guess what? Those people go the same day, they go to the grocery store, they buy food, they buy beverages, they eat it, they drink it, and they're still alive. Why? Because all these foods, all these beverages, all the flavors are essential oils. So the FDA has an entire article that talks about the oils that they have approved, essential oils for flavoring of food and beverages. Unfortunately, these are typically not natural, pure essential oils. They're synthetics because the food and beverage companies are trying to save money. But if you think that you never ever consume an essential oil, you need to rethink your life because you're eating and drinking them every single day. And you can go, let's say in France, and you go to the pharmacy and say, I'm a little kind of cold, I have a little cough, I need something. And they will ask you and say, do you want a pill, a medicine, or you want something natural? So I'll say, I want something natural. They say, do you want an essential oil? I say, cool, I want an essential oil. And they say, how do you want it? I have capsules here, I have capsules there. And you can buy entire boxes with pre-filled capsule with essential oils, and you can consume them. So they are used in the culture, and they're still doing very well.
I get the question all the time, should you ingest oils and is that okay? And my answer is, it really depends. Let's take this and let's talk about it in terms of from a statistical standpoint and from a numbers standpoint, and then let's also use common sense. So that's the other thing. So here's where I'm at on it. Essential oils should primarily, in most cases, be used topically and through inhalation, but some oils can be used internally. And some oils can be used internally long-term, and other oils should only be used internally for an emergency or a very short period of time. So that's really the answer, is it completely depends on the essential oil. And so that's why I think there's a lot of debate, is everybody wants this cookie cutter answer of yes or no, but it's not yes or no. But this is why I think it's oftentimes good to, if you are going to take them internally, now some of them we know are safer, such as peppermint and lemon, and doing just, a single drop is actually plenty. You don't want to overdo it, but with certain oils, we know, especially the oils that have more powerful antimicrobial properties and that might act on the liver, we want to be careful of, especially herbs like clove essential oil is a great example of that. It has a very high antioxidant strength, which you can actually get too many antioxidants. So more isn't always better. But let me give you an example to answer your question. Are essential oils okay to take internally? Well, let's use cinnamon, for example, okay? And there are different types of cinnamon, but let's talk about the real Ceylon cinnamon. So if you have and there's actually, I was recently reading a journal from Mayo Clinic, and they were working with patients with diabetes, and they were recommending that their patients consume 1 to 6 grams daily of cinnamon of cinnamon powder. Now let's use that in essential oil ratio. Well, how much peppermint powder is the equivalent to 1 drop of cinnamon oil? 1 drop of cinnamon oil, if we're talking about the compound cinnamaldehyde, 1 drop of cinnamon oil is the equivalent to 1/3 of a teaspoon of cinnamon powder. So in this published study, what they were pretty much recommending is somebody could do about 1/3 of a teaspoon 3 times a day, so a teaspoon of cinnamon powder a day is what they were recommending, and seeing great results, fantastic results with these patients with diabetes. What would the equivalent be? 1 drop of cinnamon oil 3 times daily. So again, if we're going at it from a purely medical standpoint and looking at it from from the proof of the medical journals, we know that something like doing an essential oil of cinnamon, 1 drop 3 times daily, is a therapeutic dose. Now here's where we run into issues with people taking them internally. Some people think the more the better, and hey, I'm doing 5 drops of cinnamon 3 times a day. That's actually going to cause cinnamon toxicity, and it's over time. Now, not one time, but if you're doing that day after day after day, it really does overburden the liver and certain cells within your system. But it'd be the same with cinnamon powder. If you were doing a tablespoon of cinnamon powder 3 times a day, these are fat-soluble antioxidants, not water-soluble. And because they're fat-soluble, it's going to be hard on the liver and even the digestive system for that reason. So again, to answer the question, are essential oils okay to do internally? It absolutely depends on the oil. And this is where it can get complicated. I know why some people are fearful online and some people are completely anti-ingestion, because here's the other thing you run into: the quality of the essential oil and the type of plant itself. For instance, if we're talking about cinnamon, which are really cassia. Some oil companies today are putting cassia and labeling it cinnamon, and that contains a compound. So before I was talking about cinnamaldehyde. That's the main component in cinnamon and cinnamon oil that's therapeutic. Well, there's another compound found in cassia which you shouldn't do internally because it's toxic to the body, and it's the same thing. If you're doing large amounts of cassia powder, it's the same problem. And so again, it's not an easy question to answer, but that's why, here's what I recommend to my patients. I let them know, hey, the majority of the time, let's just use these topically. But you know what, if I recommend it therapeutically, that you do cinnamon oil, let's go ahead and do it, because you're working with me, a doctor of functional medicine or doctor of natural medicine. And so let's do it like that. But there are certain essential oils I think are fine to do internally in small amounts. I think citrus oils are okay. And I don't go over 3 drops a day typically, but I think doing a little bit of I think 1 drop is enough. I think that's what people have to realize is 1 drop is the equivalent of 1/3 teaspoon. With most, in most cases, compared to a plant. So I think that, citrus oils in small amounts, I think peppermint oil in small amounts, I think certain oils like frankincense in small amounts are okay internally, but I think other oils that are strongly antimicrobial, such as oregano and clove and some others, you got to be careful with. I mean, oregano oil, some people will do that for a long period of time, let's say for a candida cleanse. I never recommend that more than 7 days in a row, because though it's not going to damage your body like an antibiotic would, a traditional medical antibiotic, over time it can still reduce the amount of good bacteria in your gut. It'll kill more of the bad, but it can affect the good too. So I think it's really all about using common sense when it comes to working with essential oils internally. And the other thing about something like a cinnamon oil, that's something that should be taken with food. You don't want to take it on an empty stomach. And I think that's another thing I'd love to mention is that, when essential oils are used internally, I believe they should really always be consumed with food. Because there are things within food that are going to really support that digestion and also make it easier on the digestive system, when it comes to actually absorbing the benefits of the oil.
So now from the FDA point of view, there is a different kind of topic that you need to look at. It's called labeling. So if you label something as a cosmetic act oil, meaning an aromatic, you're not allowed to ingest it. If it's part of a supplement, then you can ingest it. Once you have a safe oil to ingest in your hand, how would you ingest it? Well, I demonstrated you one way to do that. It's just kind of drop it in under your tongue or on your tongue. Another way to do that is to take a glass of water, and then you drop a few drops here, and then you just start drinking. Now, another way to do that is to take little capsules. This is a little capsule maker, just to put the capsule in there. And just to show you how that works, these are vegetable capsules, they empty. Now don't try with water, because water will dissolve it. But you can use any kind of oil, coconut oil, whatever, or an essential oil. And the way you would do that, you would open that capsule, and you would take your oil, and then you just kind of fill it up. And now you see, hopefully, so here I just filled the whole capsule. So I'm gonna cap that back together, dunk. Voila, I have my essential oil capsule. What do I do with this? I take my essential oil infused water, and I'm healthy. Most of the essential oils you can ingest. There is a whole list in the FDA which one are approved, one not. And if your company that sells you your essential oil is very smart, they will go to the energy and to the costs and the lawyers and the collaboration with the FDA to label them so that you as a consumer, you know which one you can consume internally and which one not. And again, I absolutely agree with the aromatherapy school with that line of thinking. They are very on the careful side. That's always good to be. There are some essential oil you should never ingest. They have certain things in it that your body will not tolerate very well. And then the last question is, what dose can you ingest? If you do a few drops of each oil, that will be fine. Have you watched a movie commercial on a drug? So you're sitting there and you're seeing a grandma playing with the children, somebody helping building a house for someone who lost a house. There's a voice in the back that will tell you,
call your doctor if your depression worsens or you have unusual changes in behavior or thoughts of suicide. Antidepressants can increase these in children, teens, and young adults. Elderly dementia patients have an increased risk of death or stroke. Call your doctor if you have high fever, stiff muscles, and confusion to address a possible life-threatening condition.
you will die the most terrible death you ever seen.
Or if you have uncontrollable muscle movements, as these could become permanent. High blood sugar has been reported. In some cases, extreme high blood sugar can lead to coma or death.
But all you'll see is the wonderful mother with the children and the flowers, and you don't listen to that voice anymore.
Other risks include decreases in white blood cells, which can be serious, dizziness upon standing, seizures, trouble swallowing, and impaired judgment or motor skills.
So when you take the essential oil in comparison to that one drug, because now you're giving this mega dose of this drug, of course you have all these side effects. But when you take the oil, you have all this balance, and so your safety margin is just absolutely amazing. It's just humongous. If it's done in a reasonable amount, it's very, very safe.
You can read a lot of books out there that forbid any internal use of oils. They say it's dangerous, you should never take them internally. And then you read another book that says it's okay. Well, here's the source of that contradiction. There are several schools of thought and schools of practice with use of oils. The German school of thinking is that the best way to take the oils is to inhale them. And that's a good idea, because when you inhale them, not only do they go to the limbic brain where you can deal with emotional issues, but they go into your lungs and into your bloodstream, and they reach every organ and cell in your body that way. But then you have the British school, which thinks that oils are intrinsically dangerous. They don't recognize any healing properties of the oils, and they basically recommend diluting essential oils down to no more than 2 to 5%, and then use it for massage. And they also believe that it's dangerous to take oils internally, and they don't even think an undiluted oil should be put on your skin. Well, partly that has to do with they don't have good oils. Most oils out there that you will buy that have a label on them that says an essential oil are maybe only partly essential oil. They have other things in them that would be toxic and would be dangerous and should not be taken internally. The British are not careful about what kind of oil they use, so they're using inferior grade oils, and for that reason they have to be careful. And that's where all of those fears and cautions come from. So when you see these contradictions, just realize they're in a different world. And all the dangers they talk about, they're not there for what we use. But then there's another school of thought, and that's the French school, is that oils are pretty safe to use any way you want to use them, provided they are pure, organic, properly distilled oils. So in the French school, they take them orally, they take them directly on the skin, they take them by holding them in the mouth. They will soak right through the lining of your mouth and go straight to the bloodstream that way. But you have to use common sense. You don't want to drink a whole bottle of any oil. Too much of anything, even a good thing, can be deadly. So as long as you don't overdo it, it's safe to take a pure therapeutic grade oil.
The primary purpose of the FDA in general is public health and safety. So that's the first thing they're looking for in any product they regulate is it safe for consumer use? A product like a dietary supplement which is not a drug. Safety is essentially where the FDA really ends its concerns. What they look for in a product like a drug is safety and effectiveness. That's not to say that a dietary supplement product should not be effective, but it's covered on a standard of whether the claims being made are false and misleading, whereas compared to a drug, the FDA itself evaluates whether a drug product is safe and effective. Essential oils can possibly fit into really 3 potential categories and be legally marketed. And there's a few considerations for how you get there. But the 3 categories would generally be a dietary supplement, a cosmetic, or really even possibly just a general consumer product that might not be regulated by the FDA. The considerations that you take into account when deciding where it fits into that regulatory classification are 2 things. First is the method of use, and second is what is the intended use and what kind of claims are made about the product. If it is orally ingested, then the most likely category is that it's a dietary supplement, and that would really be the only legal category for an orally ingested essential oil product. If it's topically applied, it's probably a cosmetic. If it's just used for aromatic purposes, then it's possible it could be just a general consumer product that the FDA doesn't regulate. Like I said, though, it's a little difficult to fit into that category. And the reason is the second consideration, and that is, what is the intended use of the product? What kind of claims are made in the labeling? So with an orally ingested essential oil, if it's a legally marketed dietary supplement, you can make claims about the health benefits it has by talking about the effects the product has on the structure or function of the body. Different body systems help promote a healthy immune system, for example. You cannot, however, talk about any types of diseases. And then you're subjecting your orally ingested essential oil product to regulation as a drug, and it would be an unapproved new drug because it hasn't gone through the new drug approval process. For a topically applied product, the most logical FDA category is a cosmetic, and those are things that are applied to the body, and really the purposes are permissible cosmetic purposes are to cleanse, beautify, not talking about any disease, conditions, the symptoms of diseases. Then the FDA generally takes a hands-off approach. Now you have essential oils which are making these types of sort of general well-being claims, I'll call them, and affecting your mood, but maybe they're used through a diffuser and they're really for their aromatic purposes. They're not applied to the body, they're not orally ingested. An argument can be made that that's not even regulated by the FDA. Any company, essential oil company, having regulatory issues with the FDA, usually the issue is the claims that are being made. That's the first thing that the FDA tends to jump on. It's the most obvious thing. Now, for topically applied products, which would be presumptively a cosmetic, you're actually not allowed to talk about the structure or function of the body. So the company first, has to identify, of course, the exact substance that it wants to get approved for drug pharmaceutical use. You submit what's called an investigational new drug application. If that gets approved, then you have the ability to begin doing human clinical trials. And generally speaking, there are 3 phases of clinical trials, with each getting more and more specific, starting from general safety to going up to the phase of, is this drug not only safe but effective for what we want it to do? When the clinical trials are done and generally the FDA and the company are really satisfied with the results and it looks promising, then you submit a new drug approval application. But let's say the FDA does approve it, then it's approved for that specific ingredient, active ingredient, in this specific amounts or concentrations for a very specific use. It's very rigid. It's very time consuming. It takes many years to go through this process, and it costs a lot of money. We're all familiar with these commercials for various products, and it seems like a long list of things, and those are really sort of side effects that were noted during the clinical trials. And the FDA has made the determination that, well, there are some side effects, some potential risks, but they've made a determination that the potential benefits of the product for this specific population, for these people with these specific conditions, generally speaking, will outweigh these risks, but that it's something people should know about so they can talk to their own physicians and get proper medical advice. I do expect that it will get bigger. It has gotten significantly bigger over the years, especially if companies that come into the market do their best to try and play by the rules, so to speak, and don't push the limits too far so that the FDA feels the need to come in and crack down on the industry as a whole. So in 1994, Congress passed a law that's called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and it's commonly referred to as DSHEA, which is the acronym. And what DSHEA did was give full legal status to dietary supplements. Prior to that, they were really kind of their own category, and a lot of people said they're illegal. They're being offered as drugs, and you can't sell them. DSHEA gave formal legal recognition to dietary supplements, and they defined them as a dietary ingredient and gave some examples of things, herbs, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and other things, substances that have nutritive value, and people take them just specifically for the purposes of increasing the amount of that particular substance in their diet, hence the term dietary supplement. You hear a lot of people say dietary supplements are not regulated, and that's not really true. They are regulated. They are not regulated to the same rigorous extent as drug products, definitely. But there are restrictions on both what kind of ingredients can be in a dietary supplement and also what kind of claims you can make about the health benefits of a dietary supplement. Because the law was passed in 1994, that is sort of a cutoff point. Dietary supplements were designated as a category of food by the DSHEA Act, a substance that was part of the U.S. food supply prior to October of 1994, essentially has a presumption of being safe. Now, the government, the FDA in particular, can at some point go back and say, no, we now believe that this substance is not safe, but they have to, that the burden of proof is on them, is to show that this pre-1994 ingredient is no longer safe. It is not as rigorous as the drug approval process, but the FDA does review that. Sometimes they have some questions and there's a dialogue back and forth. They may say, you know what, we don't think this substance is safe and it shouldn't be marketed as a dietary ingredient. That essentially closes the door. The FDA does not, however, approve, and I put quotes in that it's not a formal approval of that dietary ingredient. It's basically saying, we looked at the safety information you provided, and we don't have any more questions for you about whether that product is safe or not.
Current medicines are the result of a recent history, but a history which is significant and has been forgotten recently. Modern medicine actually started in the early 20th century when a German pharmacochemist created salvarsan, which was a medicine for the treatment of syphilis. And what is interesting there is that instead of starting with substances which had been used for centuries, if not millennia, he did the opposite. He started with substances and he tried to find what they could be used for. So there is an inversion here in the relationship between a substance and its applications. And from that, all the modern pharmacochemistry started, having substances and exploring what they could do on the organism. And this is where all the modern pharmacochemistry stems from, which is a fantastic way of creating new medicines, because if you know exactly what a pathological mechanism is, you can act directly on that specific mechanism. But on the basis of that, there is a counter effect of that. We have transformed the approach to the treatment of diseases into the action on one specific mechanism. And particularly from the 1950s on, all the world of therapies has been focusing on acting on one mechanism, which has been very successful. Penicillin has been absolutely fabulous as a medicine. It has saved millions of lives, particularly during World War II, for example. But there is a limitation to that, which is the side effects and the focusing on only one mechanism. There is now an increasing resistance to these agents, precisely because there is a limited action focusing on one mechanism, and the organism and the pathogens have cultivated reactions to these agents. And so now this philosophy and this strategy doesn't work as well as it was doing when it was created. And we need to reverse that. And that's where the plants can enter into the game.
I do realize there's still a lot of confusion about compliance. And in general, you can say you're trying to sell a product or you're trying to sign up a new distributor. Automatically, that is called commercial speech because you're trying to do something commercially. You're trying to sell something or to make money of it in one way or the other. Commercial speech has its own rules, and there's two agencies that will look at that. The FDA would look at the health claims that you make, and then the FTC, so the FDA stands for Food and Drug Administration, and the FTC, which stands for the Federal Trade Commission, will look at on how do you use your marketing claims to try to sell something. I frequently talk about living above the line. We have a big red line. Everything above the line is wellness, fitness, healthy living, toxin-free living. It's anything you can do to support your own lifestyle, to make a healthy lifestyle. So as long as you talk about these things that are above the line, you're going to be fine. The moment you go below the line, it means you're talking about disease, about prevention, about treating, about curing. All that's a no-no. It's all about two words. It's intended use and another word called labeling, or the label. Okay? So what is intended use? Well, if I take a peppermint and say, I'm going to use the peppermint for asthma, the intended use is to use it as a medicine against asthma. That's illegal, it's a no-no. But when I say I use peppermint to support my healthy breathing, that's a different story. Now you're above the line, you wellness, fitness, and you just try to improve your life. Now, label is a little more difficult to understand. People always think the label is just what's on the bottle, right? There's always a little label that sticks to the bottle. Whatever product you buy has a label. And I always try to get people to read labels and learn how to read labels. So they always think, well, if we talk about essential oil, it's the label on the bottle of the essential oil that we're talking about. No. From the FDA and FTC point of view, the label means everything that talks about the product, mentions the products, or shows the product. Meaning your website, your Facebook page, your email even that mentions a product, whatever it is. So you have to be really, really careful what you say because it's all considered a label. So when it comes to essential oils, the essential oil company will go, in this case to the FDA because it's kind of health products, and they will say, okay, we intend to use peppermint for this. This could be aromatic use. In other words, you do aromatherapy or you smell it. It could be topical use, so you put it somewhere, or it could be internal use. We know, look, the FDA knows there's like 15,000 studies on essential oils, so they can read. So why they cannot read all these research studies that we have? Well, they can and they do. But it's not up to them to tell it because there's 10 studies on peppermint showing this, that now every company can claim that. It's up to the company to go to the FDA and say, look, we used our oil to do this study, and we did multiple, and it always showed the same result. Therefore, we want you to approve it for this use. Do we want that? Do you want for every oil that you consume today to go to a physician to get a prescription, or to only be able to buy this in the pharmacy? I don't think so. So this is why the company, they stay with the Cosmetic Act or with the Dietary Act. They don't go to the over-the-counter or the Professional Prescription Medicine Act. All over the world, when you look at essential oils, with the exception of the US, in 99% of the countries, they are registered as cosmetics only. So that restricts the claims you can make around the world even more than what you can do in the US. So some people think, oh my God, the FDA is so terrible. Well, go somewhere else in the world. The FDA is way more liberal than other places around the world, interestingly.
My son was about 5 years old when he started presenting some odd behaviors.
Motor tics and blinking of the eyes, and
Head jerking.
he did a head jerking movement, which, like he was nodding, but it was obvious that he had no control over these movements.
It was very frightening. We didn't know what was happening to our son. It was, in 24 hours, he was like a different child.
It was a rapid change. You went from a child who was one way to a child that in many ways you didn't recognize. And we were frightened. We went to see the pediatrician and trying to find some sort of an answer as to why these things were happening to our son. And it just seemed like no matter what doctor we went to, we would not get an answer.
Yeah, and it didn't make sense what the doctors were saying.
Some doctors said, oh, he has a motor tic disorder, and boys do that, and don't worry about it, it'll go away by itself.
Right. And it wasn't going away, and we had to do something very quickly.
It seemed that it was getting worse, and his condition was progressing. And we went to a series of neurologists and other professionals to try to find out what was wrong. And finally, we came across the fact that my son had come down with an autoimmune condition that was caused by streptococcus bacteria, or strep throat, something that kids get all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And this bacteria caused a situation in his body and triggered all of these symptoms, from these movements to emotional issues,
like
and
emotional
anxiety.
liability, didn't want to go to school, was very afraid to go to school.
And this as from a parent's perspective, was just beyond us. And this sent us on a course of pharmaceutical drugs for my son for close to 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And his condition just progressively got worse. And we were looking desperately for an answer. As people of faith, we were deeply in prayer about the situation, asking God for an answer. Just give us the tools, something that we can do to help our child. We have one child, and it was just devastating to us to watch him go from such a vibrant young child to a child who was battling something that really was hard to understand. And we came across some articles and some research data on essential oils, something that really was something we really didn't have a grasp on, didn't understand. But we had heard about it before.
Yes.
A friend, your friend from high school.
My friend of mine, she said, you need to try essential oils. And at the time, it wasn't time for that yet. And so
it was almost 5 years before. And when something isn't time for you, it's not time for you. But
exactly.
Now we were desperate.
Time.
And so we began to look into it. And she told us about a woman who had used essential oils more in a therapeutic way to support her child's body, so that the body could recover, could heal itself. I've always understood from a biblical standpoint that our bodies were created to heal themselves if you give them the right support. And so this was interesting to me. And so we reached out to this lady, and she was a physical therapist, and she began to share with us how essential oils could affect our son's body, and how they could support him to heal his own body, to his body to step up, his immune system to recover. And we began our journey there with essential oils.
And we started using them, and in about a month we started seeing a few things change. And maybe to some people they were little things, but for us it was big, because that showed us that something was happening.
Something was taking place.
There was a change happening, that the oils were actually doing something.
You could see that as we progressed, little things became bigger things, and things were disappearing. And it was clear. It was clear that the oils were changing him, that something was taking place within his body, something that truthfully had not happened the traditional route. We never saw a breakthrough like this, and we tried and we sought that. And so it's not that we are our thought process is that we don't like the traditional methods, but they didn't help us. And so we reached out to something that is very ancient, something that is, from our standpoint, very biblical. And our son changed, and within months, I would say, within months, the condition that had plagued him for a few years began to disappear. His body began to heal itself. And I think that's important because we understood that it's not the essential oils, but it's the body. It's the essential oils that become the support system to help the body do what it's supposed to do. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Absolutely. And have the ability to heal ourselves. God put that within us. And then here's this tool that we were able to take and harness and able to help the body do what I think God intended all along.
Yeah, and we were so excited when we saw our son was back. He was just doing wonderful.
Everything changed.
He started going back to school. He was happy again. He was able to function.
His grades in school improved. The motor tics disappeared. The movements disappeared. And even from a scientific standpoint, even from a clinical standpoint, the medical data showed that something took place in my child, and what was there before was no longer there now.